The winter wind cut across the Belgian fields like a blade, sharp enough to sting through wool coats and into bone. Private first class. Tommy Hale hunched deeper into his foxhole, rifle cradled tight against his chest, breath fogging the grey air. Somewhere beyond the frozen hedgerows, German artillery rumbled, not close enough to kill, but close enough to remind every man on the line that the war was far from over. Tommy was 22, from a wheat town in Kansas that barely made the map. Before the war, the loudest sound he knew was the grain elevator groaning in August. Now his world was mud, smoke, and the constant waiting. Waiting for orders, waiting for shells, waiting to see which of the men beside him would still be breathing by nightfall. "Hell of a place to spend Christmas," Sergeant Jack O'Connor muttered, crouching beside him. O'Connor was pushing 30, Irish-American, Brooklyn-born, with a voice like gravel, and a steady calm that kept the platoon stitched together when everything else came apart. Tommy managed a half-smile. "Ma wanted me home by New Year's," he said. "Guess I'll be late." O'Connor snorted softly. "We all are, kid." Behind them, the American line stretched thin across the countryside. Maps back at Battalion HQ said the Germans were finished, retreating, desperate, broken. That's what the brass believed. But men like Tommy knew better. The enemy still fought hard, and lately, they fought strange. Orders didn't make sense anymore. German units counterattacked when retreat would have saved them. Tanks rolled forward into killing zones, infantry thrown against American firepower like dice on a losing table. Prisoners, when they were taken, spoke in whispers, of impossible commands, of a leader in Berlin who refused to bend, who demanded cities be held when there was nothing left to hold them with. That madness filtered down the line in blood and noise. Earlier that morning, Lieutenant Robert Kincaid had stood before the platoon, map flapping in the wind. Fresh-faced and straight-backed, he looked like he belonged on a recruitment poster more than a frozen field. "Intel says the Germans are dug in along that ridge," Kincaid said, pointing. "But High Command believes they'll pull back by nightfall. We advance at 1400 hours. No one liked it. O'Connor's jaw tightened. Corporal Luis Martinez shifted his weight, eyes narrowing. They'd heard the shelling. They'd seen enemy movement. "They ain't pulling back," Martinez whispered when Kincaid walked away. "They're baiting us." Tommy said nothing. He watched the sky instead, low and heavy, as if the world itself was holding its breath. When the order came, they went over the rise anyway. Snow churned into mud under their boots. Machine gun fire cracked almost instantly, ripping into the air where they'd been told nothing would be waiting. Men dropped. Shouts filled the field. Medics ran, ducking low, red crosses stark against white armbands. Tommy fired until his fingers went numb, heart hammering so loud he couldn't hear his own thoughts. Somewhere ahead, German voices barked frantic commands. Urgent, angry, desperate. The enemy wasn't retreating. They were clinging, obeying something beyond reason. By dusk, the ridge was theirs, but the cost lay scattered in the snow. Bodies zipped into canvas bags. Helmets lined up in silent rows. O'Connor lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "That push shouldn't have happened," he said quietly. "No sense to it." Tommy stared at the darkening horizon. He thought of his father's letters, always neat, always optimistic. Of his sister Ruth, who wrote about ration lines and blackout curtains, pretending everything was fine. The war didn't feel like it was ending. It felt like it was unraveling, like a machine driven too hard by a man who refused to admit it was broken. That night, in a farmhouse turned command post miles away, American officers pored over intercepted reports. German divisions ordered to stand fast without fuel, cities declared fortresses with no supplies, entire units sacrificed for lines on a map. "Why would anyone do this?" a major asked, exhaustion etched deep into his face. No one answered. But the implications were clear. An enemy no longer fighting rationally was more dangerous, not less. Back at the line, Tommy lay awake, rifle across his chest, listening to distant guns. He wondered how many more orders would come that didn't make sense on either side. How many more men would pay for decisions made by someone far removed from mud and blood? The wind howled across the field, carrying with it the promise of another day of fighting. And somewhere beyond the darkness, the war twisted further out of control. The days that followed blurred into a single grinding rhythm of advance and resistance, each mile paid for in blood. The snow melted into brown sludge under tank treads and boots, and the countryside became a maze of ruined villages and shell-shattered trees. Every town looked the same once it was taken. Broken walls, burned barns, the smell of cordite hanging in the air long after the guns fell silent. Tommy stopped counting the dead after the first week. Orders came down faster now, sharper, edged with urgency that didn't match the situation on the ground. German units were supposed to be collapsing. Instead, they fought like men with nothing left to lose. They counterattacked at dawn and dusk, charged across open ground, under artillery fire, clung to villages long after supply lines were cut. "Feels like they're daring us to kill 'em," Martinez said one night, chewing on a piece of hard bread. "Like somebody back there wants bodies, not victories." Sergeant O'Connor didn't answer right away. He stared into the dark, listening. Somewhere far off, a lone machine gun rattled, then stopped. The implication hung heavy in the room, a war directed by ideology and obsession, not reason, an enemy commander who refused to accept reality, no matter the cost. Out on the line, that reality meant more fighting. One afternoon, Allied planes screamed overhead, silver flashes against the clouds. They dove toward a German column retreating down a road, bombs falling in precise patterns, tearing steel and men apart. Tommy watched from a hillside, a knot forming in his stomach. When the smoke cleared, there was no counterattack, no fallback position, just wreckage. "They could have pulled back yesterday," Martinez said quietly. "Why wait till now?" No one answered. The Germans they captured afterward looked hollow, young boys and grey-haired men alike. One prisoner, hands shaking, kept muttering in broken English. "Orders, no retreat. Führer says hold." Tommy looked away. The man's eyes weren't defiant, they were afraid. That night, as snow began to fall again, O'Connor gathered the platoon. His voice was steady, but there was an edge beneath it now. "Listen up," he said. "Whatever madness is driving them, it ain't driving us. We watch each other. We move smart. We survive. That's the mission." Tommy nodded along with the others, but inside, something shifted. The war no longer felt like two armies testing strength. It felt like one side bleeding itself dry, and the other being forced to wade through the mess to finish it. In the distance, artillery thundered again, closer this time. The Germans weren't done, and neither were they. Tommy tightened his grip on his rifle, eyes fixed on the dark tree line ahead, knowing the next order would come soon, and it might make even less sense than the last. The breaking point came in the dead of winter, when the forests of the Ardennes swallowed sound and sanity alike. Snow fell thick and constant, muffling artillery until shells seemed to erupt out of nowhere. Visibility dropped to nothing, radios failed, roads vanished under white, and into that confusion the German army lunged forward, not with strategy, not with hope of victory, but with blind force, driven by orders that ignored weather, logistics, and reality itself. For Tommy Hale and what remained of his platoon, it felt like the world had tilted sideways. They were roused before dawn by the thunder of tanks, German armor grinding through the trees where intelligence swore none could pass. Flares lit the sky green and red, casting long twisting shadows across the snow. "Incoming!" "Armor front!" someone shouted. The line erupted. Machine guns opened up. Bazookas fired from half-frozen hands. Shells slammed into American positions, tearing apart foxholes that had taken days to dig. Tommy pressed himself into the earth as the ground shook, snow cascading into his collar. He could hear men yelling, some in pain, some in panic, some just calling names into the chaos. "Hold the line!" O'Connor bellowed, standing taller than sense allowed, firing into the white blur ahead. "They don't get past us!" German infantry surged forward behind their tanks, coats dusted with snow, faces grim and hollow. They came straight on, ignoring casualties, stepping over the fallen. It wasn't courage. It was compulsion. Tommy fired until his rifle clicked empty, fingers numb, arms aching. He reloaded by feel alone. Somewhere nearby, Lieutenant Kincaid was shouting into a radio that spat nothing but static. "We're cut off," Kincaid yelled. "We're completely cut off." The realization hit like a punch to the chest. No resupply, no retreat, just hold or be overrun. Hours passed that felt like days. The snow turned pink, then brown. Tanks burned, black smoke clawing at the sky. When a German Panther rolled too close, Martinez charged forward with a bazooka, teeth clenched. "I got it!" he shouted. The rocket hit true. The tank erupted, flames bursting outward. Martinez turned back toward the line, just as machine gun fire caught him in the chest. He fell hard, sliding into the snow. "Luis!" Tommy screamed, scrambling toward him. O'Connor grabbed Tommy's pack and hauled him back. "No! You'll get killed!" Martinez lay still, eyes open, staring at nothing. Snow settled on his coat. Something inside Tommy broke loose then. Not fear, not anger, but a raw, hollow resolve. He rose and fired again, screaming without words, pouring everything he had into holding the line. By nightfall, the German assault faltered, not because it was beaten, but because it had burned itself out. Bodies lay everywhere. Equipment abandoned, survivors pulled back without order, without plan. The Americans held, but barely. In a ruined farmhouse behind the line, a makeshift aid station overflowed. Wounded men lay shoulder to shoulder, groaning, shivering. Blood soaked the floorboards. Tommy sat against a wall, helmet in his lap, staring at his hands. O'Connor slumped beside him, face streaked with grime and exhaustion. "They threw everything they had at us," he said. "Everything!" Lieutenant Kincaid entered, coat torn, eyes red. "High Command says they can't keep this up," he said. "They're out of fuel, out of men, still getting orders to attack." O'Connor laughed once, bitter. "Orders from who?" Kincaid didn't answer. Outside, German prisoners were being marched past, hundreds of them. Some limped, some wept. None looked defeated so much as relieved. One young German soldier met Tommy's eyes as he passed. He raised his hands higher, almost apologetic. The battle marked the turn. After that, the German attacks lost their force, their shape. Whole units surrendered. Others fought on pointlessly, annihilated by Allied firepower they could no longer counter. Cities declared fortresses fell in days, sometimes hours. The war didn't end in a single triumphant moment. It unraveled, threads snapping one by one under the weight of irrational command. Weeks later, as spring crept in and the guns moved east, Tommy stood on a ridge overlooking a shattered town. Smoke rose in thin columns. The fighting there was over. He felt older than his years, hollowed out by loss, but alive. O'Connor stood beside him, lighting a cigarette with steady hands once more. "You did good, kid," he said. "You made it." Tommy nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. The enemy was collapsing now, not because they were weak, but because they had been driven past reason, past strategy, past the point where war could be fought to win. And that made all the difference. Spring came quietly, almost shyly, as if the world itself wasn't sure it was allowed to feel whole again. The snow melted first, revealing churned earth and scars that would not fade with the seasons. Trees budded where artillery had torn limbs away. Rivers ran clear again, though their banks still remembered blood. And across the roads of Germany and the liberated lands beyond, white flags appeared, hung from windows, tied to sticks, raised by hands that had finally been told to stop. For Tommy Hale, the end of the war didn't arrive with a roar. It arrived in silence. The last German unit his platoon encountered didn't fire a shot. They stepped out from the trees at dawn, rifles dropped, hands raised, faces hollow and grey. Their officer, barely older than Tommy, spoke softly through a translator. "We have no orders," the man said. "Berlin is gone." No one cheered. No one laughed. The moment felt too fragile for noise. American officers talked about it quietly now, in after-action reports and low conversations, how irrational orders had turned a retreat into annihilation, how the refusal to adapt had doomed the German military more surely than Allied guns. For the men on the ground, it meant something simpler. It meant they were alive. Weeks later, as trucks rolled west and the long journey home began, Tommy stood at the back, watching Europe recede behind him. He felt no hatred, just exhaustion, and a deep aching hope that the world would remember what had happened here. O'Connor climbed up beside him, tossing a pack into the truck bed. "You heading back to Kansas?" he asked. "Yeah," Tommy said. "Gonna try to remember how quiet sounds." O'Connor smiled faintly. "Good luck with that." The truck rumbled forward. Fields passed by. Ruins gave way to open land. Somewhere far behind them, the last echoes of the war faded into history. Tommy closed his eyes and let the wind wash over his face. He carried the weight of loss with him, but also the certainty that madness had not won. Brotherhood had. Endurance had. And against impossible odds, reason had survived long enough to bring the war to its end. The world would rebuild. The scars would remain. And the story of how irrational command had shattered an empire would be told, by those who lived through it, and by those who never made it home.